Hello everyone! I hope you're having an excellent Friday because it's time for round 12 of the 2013 Candidates Tournament, and I thought we'd kick it off with the game everyone is waiting for, Magnus Carlsen versus Vassily Ivanchuk. And I don't know if you remember their game from the first half of the tournament. It was a very intense game, and Ivanchuk did get the upper hand, but in the end the game ended in a draw. So let's see how things went this time. Yeah, there is a quote above the board that you might not understand right at the beginning of this game, but you will soon understand what it means. And before we check out the moves, let's check out the standings once again. So after round 11, Carlsen is in first place with 7.5 points, and Vassily Ivanchuk in 7th place with 4 points. So a win for Magnus Carlsen would definitely go a long way. And Vassily Ivanchuk he can't win this tournament anymore, but of course he's playing the highest rated player in the world. He wants to play the best game possible. So let's check out some photos before we check out the game. Here we have, as usual, before every round, a nice photo of photographers taking photos of Magnus Carlsen. Then we have here he is, the man of the hour, Vassily Ivanchuk, getting ready for his game, taking a stroll. Then here another nice close-up of Vassily Ivanchuk having a nice moment with himself, as usual before every game. Then we have another nice close-up of Vassily. It seems like it's just a usual day, you know, Carlsen taking a stroll, Ivanchuk not even paying attention to the game. Definitely not like it's round 12 of the 2013 Candidates Tournament. And here we have Vassily Ivanchuk. Could be checking out someone else's position, but then again, it is Vassily. You know, he could be just staring at empty space. You know, we can never tell. So yeah, I do hope you enjoyed those. Now let's check out this game. Carlsen has the white pieces, and that's definitely the place you want to be, leading after 11 rounds and having the white pieces against Vassily Ivanchuk. So e4. We have c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6, knight to c3, so holding off with d4, but only for a move. e6, now d4, c captures, knight captures, and we have the Teimour variation of the Sicilian. Queen to c7, the Bastrikov, bishop to e3, a6, queen to d2, and knight to f6 now. We have queenside castle by Carlsen, bishop to b4, and now f3, enforcing that e4 pawn. Knight to e7, we have knight to b3, d5, and now e5, kicking the knight away to d7 and preparing f4. So knight d7, we have f4 and b6, Ivanchuk prepares to develop the light square bishop. Bishop to d4, we have knight to c5, a3, attacking the bishop, and now comes knight to e4. Attacking the knight is also pinned, and also attacking the queen on d2. So queen has to move, and now comes a series of exchanges. We have knight captures, bishop captures, queen captures, and the queens come off the board. Captures and captures. And in this position, Carlsen said that he knew that Ivanchuk was better. I mean, just by looking at the pawn structure, you can realize this. But he didn't think it was anything significant. And then he thought that, you know, you can check it out in an interview after the game. There will be a link, as usual, in the description below. Carlsen thought that Ivanchuk should just continue developing, but here Ivanchuk played a5. And here Carlsen thought that this move was weakening the queen side a bit too much, and the engine definitely agrees with him. And it was at this point that Carlsen decided to play for a win. So knight to d4. We have bishop to a6, bishop to d3 now. If Ivanchuk wants to capture the bishop, then Carlsen will undouble his c-pawn. King to d7, king to d2, we have knight to c6, and rook to b1, attacking the backwards b6 pawn. Bishop captures, king captures now, and we have rook to b8. You could capture with the pawn. This seemingly undoubles your pawns, but then knight captures on d4, and then you would have a double d pawn, so it doesn't really fix the problem. King captures on d3, now rook to b8, defending the b6 pawn, and here comes a move that Carlsen characterizes after the game, and I will probably use this as a title of the video. He says that this move that he played was extremely stupid. Those were the words he used. He says that he can play pretty much anything here. There's no reason to do this. It seems like a very powerful move. The knight is coming to d6. It's a very active square. But here Ivanchuk finds amazing counterplay. Ivanchuk plays g5. Of course, you don't want to play something like f captures on g5 that leaves your e5 pawn undefended. Carlsen played g3, and now comes rook h to g8. And now Ivanchuk will get a lot of activity for this rook. We have c4. Carlsen wants to get rid of his weak pawn. G captures on f4. We have g captures on f4 and knight to e7 now. We have rook to g1, opposing Ivanchuk's rook on g8. D captures on c4, king captures on c4, and now knight to d5, attacking the weak f4 pawn. Knight to d6. And here, king to c6 by Ivanchuk. You can't capture the pawn immediately. If you capture it immediately with knight captures on f4, then rook captures, of course, rook captures, and then the b6 pawn is undefended, and rook captures on b6 pretty much fixes everything for white. So after knight to d6, king to c6. Now the king is defending the b6 pawn. Knight captures on f7, knight captures on f4, and now king to b3. We have king to c5, knight to g5, h6. We have knight to e4, this comes with check, and king to d4 now. Knight to f6, again attacking the rook, and now rook captures on g1. Rook captures on g1 and rook to c8 now. We have rook to e1. Carlsen is threatening rook to e4 to win Ivanchuk's knight on f4, so you have to do something about this. Ivanchuk plays rook to c3 check, king to b2, and now rook to f3, defending the knight. We have rook to e4 check, king to c5, and now knight to d7. Also, this comes with check, but king to d5. You cannot grab the pawn because now your rook is under attack. So Carlsen repeats knight to f6 check. Ivanchuk also repeats king to c5, and Carlsen once again repeats knight to d7 check. And here, if Ivanchuk would repeat king to d5, then it would be a threefold repetition, and the game would end in a draw. But here it's actually Ivanchuk who refuses the draw and plays king to c6. He attacks the knight. Knight to f6, we have knight to g6, and rook to c4 now. This comes with check, king to b5, and now rook to e4. Rook to f5 with a double attack on the e5 pawn, and here knight to e8. Carlsen tries to trick Ivanchuk in going for the pawn. Now if you capture it with rook captures on e5, then knight to c7. This comes with check, king to c6, and then rook captures on e5. Knight captures and knight captures on e6. So the material is once again equal. The pawn structure is a bit better for black, but it's hard to say if black can actually win this. Probably not. So after this knight to e8 move, king to c5 first by Ivanchuk, not allowing this knight to c7 check. Knight to c7, and now comes knight captures on e5, and this is the problem. Now Carlsen doesn't have the option of capturing the pawn, because now if you capture this with check, you get king to d5, and here Carlsen would lose a piece. You do have to move the rook. After you move the rook, king captures, you are down a piece. So after knight to e5, rook to h4 first, going for the h6 pawn. But king to d6. First Ivanchuk attacks Carlsen's knight, knight to b5 check, we have king to d7, and now a4. Again, you can't afford to capture the h6 pawn. If you capture it, then you get knight to f7, a very nice idea, attacking the rook and also the knight on b5, so again you lose a piece. Even if you pin Ivanchuk's knight here, then rook captures on b5, this comes with check. King has to move, and then you simply protect the knight. Again, you're up a piece. So after king d7, we have a4, first defending the knight. Now rook captures on h6 is a threat, but now Ivanchuk simply plays h5, and he won a clean pawn. So can Ivanchuk play this out to a win? Can he convert to a full point this one pawn advantage? Well, let's see. Knight to d4, attacking the rook. We have rook to g5, rook to e4 now, and knight to c5. Knight to c4, this comes with check, king to c3, attacking the knight, and now rook to e5, offering a trade of rooks. Now rook captures, if rook captures, knight captures, it's pawn up, still one knight each, but Ivanchuk is very confident in his ability to convert this, and Carlsen believes him. So Carlsen refuses. Rook to h4, we have knight to d6, and now king to d3. Rook to d5. And this knight is pinned, of course, and if Ivanchuk is able to play something like knight to f5 and exchange both knights and rooks, then 4 against 3, that's a completely winning endgame. A king and 4 pawns is, of course, winning against king and 3 pawns. So c4, attacking the rook. Rook to g5, and now comes knight to f3, attacking the rook on g5. Rook to c5, and here comes knight to d2. Rook to f5. Knight to b3, and now knight to b7. Ivanchuk now plans to play knight to c5, which will force a trade of knights, as the a4 pawn will be impossible to defend. So rook to h3, we have king to d6, king to c3, and now comes knight to c5. And you do have to trade knights, because there is no way for you to actually defend the a4 pawn. So knight captures, king captures, and now comes rook to e3 and e5. And Ivanchuk is again very confident in his ability to win this rook, ending being only a pawn up. And it's very interesting what technique Ivanchuk uses. So h4, we have king to d6, rook to d3 with check, king e6, rook to g3, king to f6, not allowing rook to g6 check, but now Carlsen tries rook to d3, going for rook to d6 check to pick up the b6 pawn. Rook to f4, now allowing rook to d6 check, but then Ivanchuk will pick up the h4 pawn. So rook comes with check, king to f5, and now rook captures on b6. Rook captures on h4, again Ivanchuk is up a pawn, and now c5, Carlsen starts pushing his passed pawn. Rook captures on a4, and here rook to h6 comes. Ivanchuk said in an interview after the game that c6 was probably a better move, and that c6 could have saved white, but the engine doesn't agree with Carlsen in this position. So rook to h6, we have king to e4 and rook to d6 now. King to d4, offering a trade. We have rook to a6 and now rook to d5. Rook captures on a5 and now rook to c4 check. King moves and now rook captures. Of course, Carlsen cannot allow to exchange rooks. So rook to a4, we have rook to c7, rook to h4, attacking the h5 pawn, rook to h7, defending, king to e3, and now Carlsen, of course, wants to set up a blockade. And this is very exciting how Ivanchuk converts this position. King to e6, king to e4, now rook to h8. King back to e3, and now king to f5. Now the king has to escort the h-pawn. King to e2, king to g5, attacking the rook. Rook to e4. Now Carlsen will try to switch places. So the rook will block the e-pawn, and he will try to block the h-pawn with the king. Rook to e8, defending the e-pawn, and now king to e3. We have h4, king to e2. We have h3, king to f2, the king has to stay in the square of the pawn, h2, king to g2, and now rook to h8. You can't play this because the rook captures on e5, of course, comes with checks. So what do you do here? It's a very interesting position, and why did Ivanchuk do this? Why did he push his pawn all the way here so nothing can protect it? So you don't even have to pause the video, of course, you see what the idea is. Here Ivanchuk played pawn to h1 and he promoted it to a queen. Why did he do it? Well, king captures on h1, now comes king to d5, king to f5, attacking the rook. Rook has to move. Rook to e1 was played, and now comes rook to g8. This was the whole point of forcing the king to h1. Now the rook is completely cutting off the king from the game, and there is really nothing this rook can do against a king and pawn. King to h2 was played, king f4, we have rook to f1 check, king e3, and it was in this position on move 90 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game. Why did he resign? Well, there's really nothing to do. The king will come to d2, for example, and then simply pushing the pawn wins the game straight away. So yeah, this could be very well be the first game, other than that game Ivanchuk played against Gelfand, where they had a 17-move draw that lasted, I believe, half an hour. This is the first normal game Ivanchuk played in this tournament that he wasn't in time trouble, and especially that he didn't lose because he ran out of time. And of course, it's the first game Magnus Carlsen lost in this tournament. So round 12 against Ivanchuk, Carlsen with the white pieces, Ivanchuk with black. Carlsen loses his first game in this tournament, and he takes a pretty hard blow since he is leading the tournament. And now, depending on how players who are trying to catch up to him, for example, Vladimir Kramnik, play out their game, it will, you know, affect the standings dramatically. But we will get to that when we check out some of the other games from round 12 of the 2013 Candidates Tournament. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, this is something Carlsen said in an interview, but you are very welcome to check it out. There is a link in the description below where you can check out all the interviews after all the games from the 2013 Candidates Tournament. Carlsen said that he thinks that he played disgracefully from move 1. Which is, I mean, Carlsen played an excellent game, but Ivanchuk didn't make a single mistake, so something worth saying. So you know, all of the moves Ivanchuk played were like the top candidate moves. So yeah, once again, I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check all my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon with another interesting game from round 12 of the 2013 Candidates Tournament. See you soon, and have an excellent Friday.